The candlelight flickers across the paper as the samurai's hand hovers perfectly still, his brush poised like a sword ready to strike. With a single breath, he dips the tip into dark ink, and in that moment, the battlefield and the writing desk become one. This wasn't just calligraphy. It was warfare in silence, a dance of discipline where every stroke carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken strategies. Welcome to the hidden world of samurai calligraphy, where brushstrokes held secrets, philosophy hid in the curves of characters, and the written word could mean the difference between life and death. You might picture samurai as warriors clad in armor, their swords gleaming, but their greatest weapon wasn't always steel. It was ink. For centuries, these elite fighters practiced shodo, the way of writing, with the same intensity they devoted to swordsmanship. Each character they painted was a mirror of their mind, unshakable focus, controlled power, and the ability to convey messages without uttering a word. Imagine a letter arriving at an enemy camp, its elegant script disguising coded instructions for an ambush, or a scroll passed between allies, its bold strokes hiding battle plans in plain sight. This art was camouflage, meditation, and weapon all at once, and the most fascinating part, the secrets are still there, waiting in the archives of history. Today we're unraveling them. We'll explore how a single brushstroke could reveal a samurai's state of mind, whether he was calm or poised for attack. We'll decode the hidden symbolism in characters that outsiders would miss entirely, and we'll uncover why masters of the brush were often the most dangerous warriors of all. Because in the world of the samurai, calligraphy wasn't just an art, it was survival. The story of samurai calligraphy begins across the sea in ancient China, where scholars first perfected the art of brush and ink. By the 6th century, these techniques reached Japan not as mere writing, but as a philosophy. Monks and nobles initially wielded the brush, but it was the samurai who transformed calligraphy into something far more potent. They didn't just copy characters, they infused them with the soul of Bushido, the warrior's code. Precision, discipline, and an unbreakable spirit, these weren't just ideals for battle. They became the foundation of every stroke. For high-ranking samurai, mastering calligraphy wasn't optional. It was as essential as drawing a sword. Imagine a daimyo, a feudal lord, sealing an alliance not with a handshake, but with a scroll. His brushwork revealed everything: confidence in the boldness of his lines, strategy in the spacing of characters, even deception in the subtle fading of ink. A shaky hand could betray doubt. Hesitation in a stroke might hint at weakness. That's why the greatest warriors trained for years, turning calligraphy into a mirror of their combat skills. Take Miyamoto Musashi, the legendary swordsman who famously dueled 60 opponents undefeated. Few know he was also a master of the brush. His calligraphy works survive today, and if you look closely, you'll see the same principles that guided his swordplay: economy of motion, flawless timing, and an almost ruthless efficiency. His ink paintings of birds and Buddhist deities aren't just art, they're lessons in focus. One of his surviving scrolls shows a single, stark character: emptiness. It's said he painted it in one breath, the way he would strike in battle, no second chances, no corrections. This fusion of art and warfare wasn't accidental. Samurai studied under Zen monks, learning that true mastery came when the mind was still. A cluttered thought could mean death on the battlefield or a blotched character on paper. That's why calligraphy halls doubled as meditation spaces, where warriors would sit for hours, grinding ink in silence until their minds were as clear as the water in the well. Only then would they lift the brush. By the Edo period, calligraphy had become a litmus test for leadership. A general's dispatches weren't just read, they were analyzed. Allies would scrutinize the thickness of his strokes for signs of fatigue, the angle of his characters for hidden urgency. Even the choice of paper carried meaning. A rough, hurried summons might signal imminent attack, while a delicately penned poem could mask preparations for war. In this way, the brush became as strategic as the katana, and the greatest samurai wielded both with equal lethal grace. To the untrained eye, A samurai's sword and brush might seem worlds apart, one made for cutting, the other for creating. But in the hands of a master, they were two sides of the same coin. The same razor-sharp focus that guided a blade through the air also shaped every stroke of ink on paper. Think of it like this: when a swordsman raised his katana, his entire being condensed into that single moment, no hesitation, no wasted movement. Calligraphy demanded the exact same clarity. A rushed stroke bled ink like a poorly aimed strike left a warrior exposed. Both required a mind so still, so present, that time itself seemed to pause. History gives us striking examples of this duality. Take Yaju Mananori, a legendary swordsman of the early Edo period. He didn't just train with weapons, he spent hours each day practicing calligraphy, believing the brush taught him more about combat than sparring ever could. In his writings, he compared the fluid motion of a descending sword to the graceful arc of a character's final stroke. Both needed perfect timing. Both left no room for error. There's a famous story about him pausing mid-battle to correct a disciple's grip on a writing brush. Even surrounded by chaos, he understood. The discipline of one art refined the other. This wasn't just philosophy. Samurai used calligraphy as literal battle preparation. Before major conflicts, warriors would often retreat to quiet chambers to write. The ritual of grinding ink, smoothing paper, and centering their breath was a form of mental armor. In one account from the 16th century, a general penned an entire poem moments before leading a charge. His attendants assumed it was a final prayer, but later, scholars realized the poem's characters concealed a tactical signal. The spacing between lines matched the formation he'd used to break enemy ranks. His brush had secretly drawn the battle plan. Zen monks, who trained many samurai, called this state mushin no mind. It wasn't about emptiness, but total absorption. When a warrior's sword moved without thought, or his brush glided without hesitation, that's when true mastery emerged. You can see it in surviving works. Compare the bold, decisive strokes of a battle-hardened daimyo's scroll to the delicate precision of a courtier's writing. The difference isn't just skill, it's temperament. One shouts like a war cry, the other whispers like a dagger drawn in shadows. Even the tools mirrored each other. A calligraphy brush was cared for with the same reverence as a sword. Samurai stored brushes in lacquered cases as finely crafted as scabbards. The best bristles came from the same winter-hunted animals, whose fur lined armor. And just as a katana's quality was tested on bamboo or straw, a brush's worth was proven by its ability to hold ink without dripping. A single waver, and the stroke was ruined. Perhaps the most telling parallel was in the way both arts were taught. Swordsmanship manuals didn't just illustrate techniques, they included pages of calligraphy exercises. The reasoning was simple. If a student couldn't control a brush, how could he control a blade? Discipline flowed from one practice to the other. There's a reason the term shuhari, the stages of mastery, applied equally to martial and artistic training. First, you imitate the forms, then you understand them. Finally, you transcend them. Whether carving through an opponent or crafting a poem, the end goal was the same: effortless power. So the next time you see a samurai's calligraphy, look closer. Those lines aren't just writing. They're the echoes of a warrior's heartbeat, the silent music of a mind honed for battle. Every curve, every pause, every flourish, it's all a dance. And the dance was never just about ink. The ink a samurai used wasn't just pigment, it was sacred alchemy. To craft an ink stick, artisans blended soot from carefully burned pine resin with animal glue, then pressed the mixture into molds adorned with auspicious symbols. The process resembled forging a blade, precise, ritualistic, infused with intention. But some warriors took it further. On the eve of battle, a samurai might slice his finger, letting blood drip into the grinding water. This wasn't superstition, it was a binding oath. The resulting ink carried his life force, turning every character into a tangible extension of his will. Writings made with such ink were thought to hold supernatural weight, oaths that couldn't be broken. Strategies imbued with fate itself. Consider the ink stone, where this transformation happened. Carved from slate or jade, its surface mirrored the stillness of a lake before battle. Grinding the ink stick against it wasn't mere preparation, it was meditation. The rhythmic circles mirrored a warrior's breathing exercises, syncing hand, mind, and spirit. A hurried grind produced clumpy, uneven ink just as a distracted swordsman left openings for his enemy. Master calligraphers could judge a samurai's discipline by the sheen of his ink. Too watery, and it hinted at impatience. Too thick, and it revealed stubbornness. The perfect consistency flowed like a drawn sword, smooth, controlled, deadly. Then there was the brush, an instrument as personal as a katana. Bamboo shafts were wrapped in silk cord for grip, echoing the hilt binding of swords. The finest bristles came from wolf or badger, selected for resilience and spring. A warrior's brush wasn't just a tool, it was an extension of his arm. Historical accounts describe daimyo testing brushes by painting a single line down a scroll. If the hairs split or the stroke wavered, the brush was discarded. This wasn't perfectionism, it was necessity. In diplomacy or war, a faltering line could signal doubt, and doubt was fatal. Paper, too, held symbolic power. Handmade from mulberry fibers, each sheet was layered with meaning. Some bore barely visible watermarks, clan crests, or secret symbols pressed during production. A letter on gold-flecked paper might convey respect, while rough-edged sheets hinted at urgency. There's a chilling example from the Sengoku period. A lord received a seemingly innocuous poem, but the paper's thickness concealed a second layer. Peeled apart, it revealed troop movements in invisible ink. Even the act of folding carried weight. A misaligned crease could insult a recipient, just as a poorly sheathed sword courted disaster. Every material in the calligrapher's kit reflected Bushido's virtues. The inkstone's unyielding surface mirrored rectitude. The brush's flexibility embodied adaptability. Paper, fragile yet enduring, spoke of loyalty, holding fast to the message it bore. Together, they formed a silent arsenal. When a samurai wrote his final poem before seppuku, the ritual suicide, he often used ink mixed with his own blood. In those stark black lines, history still hears his voice. Unbroken, resolute, speaking centuries later through the very materials he once touched. Beneath the elegant surface of a samurai's calligraphy, secrets often lurked in plain sight. Kanji characters, with their intricate strokes and layered meanings, became the perfect vessels for hidden messages. A single character could appear as a poetic flourish to the untrained eye, while signaling imminent danger to those who knew the code. Take the kanji for loyalty, Chinese letter. At face value, it was a virtue every warrior prized, but in certain contexts, its exaggerated downward stroke could indicate a traitor in the ranks, a warning pressed into the parchment like a silent alarm. One of the most chilling examples comes from a scroll exchanged between Date Masamune and his allies during the siege of Osaka. The document appears to be a simple poem about cherry blossoms, but the kanji for bloom Chinese letter is written with an unusually sharp angle on its right side. To Masamune's inner circle, this tweak signaled an attack would come from the east at dawn, when the sun blooms over the horizon. The enemy, intercepting the message, saw only art. By the time they realized their mistake, Masamune's forces had already surrounded them. Betrayal, too, hid in the brushstrokes. The kanji for trust Chinese letter, when written with deliberately uneven spacing between its radicals, could covertly identify a turncoat. There's a legend about a daimyo who received a letter from his advisor praising his wisdom. The advisor wrote the character for wisdom Chinese letter with the sun radical slightly detached, a subtle defect implying the advisor's loyalty was breaking like daylight fading at dusk. The daimyo, trained in this visual language, had the man quietly removed before his betrayal could unfold. Even the direction of strokes carried meaning. A normally vertical line slanted left might suggest retreat, while one curving right hinted at reinforcement. In one surviving battle order, the character for advance Chinese letter is written with an unusually thick first stroke, resembling a spearhead. The thickness was an artistry, it encoded the number of troops, 10 layers of ink for 10,000 men. the most brilliant part of this system, its deniability. If questioned, a samurai could always claim artistic license. After all, calligraphy was about expression. Who could prove a wobbly line wasn't just a quirk of the brush? This ambiguity made it the perfect tool for spies. During the Edo period, female ninja known as kanoichi often posed as court calligraphers. Their practice scrolls contained battle formations hidden in the negative space between characters, visible only when held to light at a precise angle. Perhaps no kanji was more dangerously versatile than harmony Chinese letter. On peace treaties, it symbolized reconciliation, but when written with a deliberately broken final stroke, it warned of assassination. In 1648, a warlord avoided poisoning because his tea servant spotted the fractured character in a guest's seemingly polite letter. The servant, once a scribe, recognized the anomaly and swapped the cups. The would-be assassin drank his own poison moments later. These techniques weren't just wartime tricks. They reflected a deeper philosophy, that true power lies in controlling perception. A samurai's brush could declare war or broker peace with the same ink, all while leaving his enemies none the wiser. Even today, scholars debate how many innocent scrolls in museums might still hold secrets waiting for someone to read between the strokes. In samurai calligraphy, the blank spaces between strokes weren't just emptiness, they were a language unto themselves. This was the philosophy of Ma, the negative space that breathed life into every character. Zen monks taught that true awareness lies not in the object, but in the space around it, the pause between breaths, the silence after a bell's ring. Samurai applied this to their brushwork, understanding that what they didn't paint could reveal as much as the ink itself. A tightly clustered group of characters might signal urgency, while wide, deliberate gaps conveyed unshakable calm even in the heat of crisis. Consider the legendary swordsman Tsukahara Bokyuden, who once settled a brewing conflict without drawing his blade. Instead, he presented his rival with a scroll featuring a single character, Patience, floating in a sea of untouched paper. The vast emptiness around it spoke louder than any threat. I have room to wait, but do you? The rival, reading the silence between the lines, stood down. This was the power of Ma, the art of saying everything by leaving space for the unspoken. Even the placement of a signature carried weight. A daimyo signing a treaty might leave extra blank space beneath his name, subtly implying room for future negotiations, or ominously suggesting the document wasn't yet complete. In one famous example from the Edo period, a shogun received a petition with characters pressed tightly to the top edge of the paper. His advisors immediately recognized the visual tension. The writer was metaphorically backed into a corner, signaling desperation without uttering a word. The tools themselves honored this principle. High-quality paper was never fully covered. The white expanse framed the ink like a swordsman's stillness frames his strike. Brush techniques emphasized this balance, the flying white method, where a nearly dry brush created wispy, broken strokes, letting the paper shimmer through. These gaps weren't accidents. They were windows into the warrior's state of mind. A master could tell if a samurai was agitated by how erratically the blank spaces interrupted his lines, much like uneven footsteps betraying unease on the battlefield. Zen monks liken Ma to the space between thoughts, the moment before action where true clarity resides. In calligraphy, this translated to the breath held before the brush touched paper, the suspended instant between strokes. Surviving works from famed samurai poets often show this discipline. A single bold character might dominate the right side of a scroll, while the left remains pristine, not empty, but charged with potential, like a sheathed sword. This asymmetry mirrored the warrior's readiness, poised between action and restraint, where meaning lived in the balance. The most profound examples emerge in death poems, where samurai facing seppuku wielded Ma with heartbreaking precision. One such scroll shows the character for Dream Chinese letter floating alone, its final stroke trailing into nothingness, the paper swallowing it like a life cut short. The emptiness here is an absence, it's the infinite. Centuries later, we still feel the weight of that unmarked space, heavy with everything left unsaid. To study samurai calligraphy isn't just to analyze ink. It's to witness how warriors turned silence into strategy, how they made the unseen as potent as the drawn blade. The next time you encounter an ancient scroll, don't just look at the characters, study the gaps between them. That's where the real battle was fought. For the samurai, calligraphy wasn't just writing, it was a portal to stillness. Every stroke demanded the same presence as standing on a battlefield. Total focus, breath synchronized with movement, the world narrowed to ink and intention. This wasn't mere artistry, it was active meditation, a path to mushin, the coveted no-mind state where thought dissolved and instinct reigned. Imagine a warrior before dawn, grinding ink in slow circles, the rhythm syncing his heartbeat to the silence. By the time his brush touched paper, his mind was as clear as a polished mirror reflecting nothing, yet ready to respond to everything. The parallels to modern mindfulness are striking. Just as apps guide today's stressed minds with breathing exercises, samurai followed the ritual of shodo grinding ink until the slurry reached perfect darkness, smoothing paper like preparing a canvas for the soul. The act itself was a sensory anchor, the scent of pine soot, the whisper of bristles, the cool resistance of paper under a guiding hand. Tokugawa Ieyasu, the unifier of Japan, famously wrote 10 pages daily, not for diplomacy, but discipline. His journals reveal a man who wielded the brush like a scalpel, cutting away distraction with every stroke. One entry from a moonlit night reads, "The ink flows where the mind does not." This is the way. Zen monks taught that mushin wasn't emptiness, but hyper-awareness, like a lake so still it reflects clouds before they form. Samurai calligraphy masters achieved this through Hitsuzendo, the way of the writing brush. A surviving scroll by the daimyo Hasakawa Sansei shows a single character, Wind, painted with such fluidity that the ink thins and thickens like a breeze. Scholars note there are no brush lifts or corrections. It was executed in one breath, a snapshot of a mind unburdened by doubt. Sansei's diaries describe these sessions as battles with the self, where the true opponent was hesitation. Even in chaos, calligraphy anchored warriors. After the bloody battle of Sekigahara, the victor Date Masamune retreated to his tent and penned a poem about winter cranes, their wings. He wrote, were strokes of ink across the sky. To outsiders, it might seem like escapism, but his generals understood. This was tactical recalibration. The poem's deliberate spacing and steady lines betrayed no trace of the adrenal rush of combat. By the time he finished, his decision-making was as precise as his brushwork. Modern neuroscience might call this a cognitive reset. The samurai knew it as Haijishin, everyday mind, undisturbed even in turmoil. The practice wasn't just for elites. Lower-ranked samurai honed mushin through renmen, chain writing the same character hundreds of times until muscle memory overtook thought. Surviving drill sheets show columns of the kanji for perseverance, each iteration tighter than the last. The goal wasn't calligraphic beauty, but eradication of self. A 17th century training manual puts it bluntly. When the hand forgets the brush, the strategy writes itself. This ethos echoes in today's emphasis on flow state, where athletes or artists lose themselves in action. The samurai simply weaponized it centuries earlier. What makes their approach unique was the stakes. A distracted meditator today might miss a breath. A samurai mid-stroke could miss an assassin's approach. That's why masters like Yamaka Tesshu fused calligraphy with swordsmanship drills, switching between brush and blade without breaking rhythm. His sword letters, characters written with a brush in one hand while parrying attacks with the other, were legendary. The ink never smudged, the strokes never faltered. Tesshu's philosophy. If you can write life while defending against death, you've mastered both. Perhaps the most poignant evidence lies in death poems. Moments before seppuku, condemned warriors would paint final verses with eerie calm. The scholar Miyamoto Musashi's last work shows the character for dream, its final stroke trailing into nothingness, yet perfectly controlled. No tremor, no rush. In that instant, calligraphy was both farewell and proof. The mind could be free, even as the body fell. Today, as mindfulness apps buzz on our phones, the samurai's ink-stained path offers a humbling reminder. True presence isn't found in silence alone, but in the marriage of focus and motion. Their brushes were more than tools. They were compass needles pointing inward, to the stillness beneath the storm, the clarity beneath the ink. When a samurai faced his final moments, whether by the blade of an enemy or his own hand in seppuku, he often left behind more than a blood-stained sword. He left a poem. These jisai, or death poems, weren't mere farewells. They were spiritual signatures, the last brushstrokes of a life lived by the sword. Written moments before death, they distilled a warrior's entire philosophy into a handful of characters, each stroke trembling with the weight of existence, each space between lines heavy with unspoken resolve. Consider the death poem of Oda Nobunaga, the ruthless unifier of Japan. Facing betrayal and surrounded by flames, he penned, "Life is but a spark in the night, let it blaze bright before the wind claims it." At first glance, it reads like poetic resignation, but examine the calligraphy. The character for blaze is written with such force that the ink bleeds through the paper, while wind trails off thinly, as if already dissolving. The contrast wasn't accidental. Nobunaga, ever the strategist, used brushwork to mirror his defiance, burning boldly even as fate blew against him. The tradition traces back to Zen monks, who saw death as the ultimate test of mindfulness. A well-known monk's death poem advises, "Empty-handed I entered the world / barefoot I leave it." Samurai adopted this practice, but with a warrior's twist. Their jais often concealed layered meanings beneath serene surfaces. The famed swordsman Tsunetomo Yamamoto wrote simply, "Moonlight on water," before his end, a classic Zen image of impermanence. Yet the way he painted water with an unusually broken final stroke hinted at unfinished business, a ripple in his otherwise calm acceptance. Hidden defiance wasn't uncommon. After the failed Akko vendetta, 47 Ronin faced execution. Their leader, Oishi Yashio, composed a poem comparing himself to a withering fern in winter. But the calligraphy told another story. The character for fern was deliberately stunted, while winter stretched unnaturally long, a silent protest against the shogunate's judgment. To those who understood the visual language, the message was clear. Even in surrender, the spirit refused to be broken. The physical act of writing these poems held ritual significance. A samurai would often compose his jisai using ink mixed with a few drops of his own blood, sealing his words with his life force. The brushstrokes became a final performance, steady hands proving mental mastery until the last breath. There's a heartbreaking account of a young warrior who, ordered to commit seppuku for a minor offense, painted the character for regret with such precision that the ink formed a perfect circle when the paper was folded. His silent rebuttal, even in death, his discipline was unbroken. Some jisai doubled as covert messages. The doomed general Kusunoki Masashige sent his son a poem about a single arrow snapping. Innocuous to enemies, his family recognized the reference to their clan's crest, 3 arrows bound together, unbreakable. The single arrow was Masashige sacrificing himself so the lineage might survive. The poem's uneven spacing between columns further encoded troop positions for a future rebellion. The aesthetics of these final works followed strict conventions. A jisai written before battle often featured bold, slashing strokes. The character for life might resemble a drawn sword. Poems composed before seppuku, however, favored restrained elegance. The legendary Miyamoto Musashi's death scroll shows the word dream with the faintest of brush lifts, as if the ink itself was evaporating. No flourish, no drama, just a fading breath made visible. Perhaps most striking is what these poems omit. You'll rarely find mentions of glory, revenge, or even pain. Instead, they speak of seasons changing, birds taking flight, dew evaporating at dawn. The warrior's life, reduced to the natural imagery he once walked past without notice. In that lies the true power of the jisai, not in shouting at death, but in whispering back to the world with ink-stained grace. The battlefield wasn't the only place where samurai calligraphy became a weapon sometimes. The most dangerous strokes were whispered between lovers. Behind the stoic armor and rigid codes of Bushido, these warriors wielded brushes to express what their swords never could: longing, passion, heartbreak. A love letter from a samurai wasn't just words on paper. It was a clandestine masterpiece, where every stroke risked as much as a duel at dawn. Take the story of a 16th century general and a noblewoman from a rival clan. Their families forbade any contact, so they communicated through what appeared to be mundane calligraphy exercises, innocuous practice scrolls exchanged under the guise of artistic critique. But hidden in the curves of certain kanji were secret symbols. The character for moon Chinese letter, when written with an exaggerated crescent, signaled their next midnight meeting. The word spring Chinese letter, with its radicals slightly detached, meant danger was near. To outsiders, these were just imperfect brushstrokes. To the lovers, they were lifelines. The artistry of these letters went deeper than code. A samurai's handwriting itself betrayed his heart. The pressure of his brush could reveal suppressed desire, characters painted with trembling intensity, or the ink pooling slightly where his hand lingered too long. One surviving scroll from the Edo period shows a poem about cherry blossoms, but the character for petal Chinese letter is smudged, as if touched repeatedly. Scholars now believe the writer, a young retainer, had traced the lines with his fingertips after the ink dried, a tactile connection to his distant beloved. Some lovers took even greater risks. Female attendants in castles, often trained in calligraphy themselves, became covert messengers. They'd slip notes into the sleeves of kimono or hide them inside folded fans. One famous tale tells of a lady-in-waiting who brushed a love letter onto the underside of a teacup's lid. When the recipient drank, the steam revealed the message, a poem that vanished as quickly as their stolen moments. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Discovery meant disgrace, even death. That's why the most skilled practitioners mastered mirror writing, crafting characters that could only be read when held to a reflective surface. Others used disappearing ink, mixing their pigment with rice starch. The message would seem blank until heated over a candle, the words emerging like shadows at dusk. A daimyo's wife in Osaka allegedly sent her lover a scroll washed with salt water, the text invisible until he licked the paper, tasting both the message and her tears. Yet not all love letters were tragic. Some celebrated joy with breathtaking creativity. A samurai might press a single red maple leaf into his letter, its veins mirroring the brushstrokes of his poem. Another sent a scroll where the characters formed the silhouette of two cranes, symbols of marital happiness. When viewed from a distance, the most poignant survival is a tiny parchment found tucked inside a war helmet. It bears just 3 characters: "Return to you. The soldier who carried it never did." What makes these fragile papers so powerful isn't just their secrecy, it's their vulnerability. In a world where emotions were deadly weaknesses, samurai let their guards down one brushstroke at a time. The ink cracked where their voices couldn't, the paper trembling where their hands never did. These weren't just love letters. They were silent rebellions, proving even the fiercest warriors bled not just from blades, but from the heart. In the shadows of feudal Japan's great castles and tea houses, calligraphy became the perfect cover for espionage. While samurai lords exchanged elegant scrolls as gifts, spies were hiding battle plans in the flourish of a single character or the spacing between lines. One of the most ingenious techniques was micro-writing, scribbling tiny characters along the frayed edges of scrolls where no one would think to look. A poem about autumn leaves might conceal troop numbers written so small they resembled the veins of painted maple. Only by holding the paper at a precise angle to candlelight would the microscopic text emerge, like shadows at dusk. Pressure coding took this deception further. By varying how hard they pressed the brush, agents could create messages that disappeared when the ink dried. Light strokes on absorbent paper would vanish completely, while heavy strokes remained visible. A surviving scroll from the Shimabara Rebellion shows this perfectly. What appears to be a simple Buddhist sutra actually marks rebel positions when viewed under steam. The heat reactivates the lightly pressed characters, revealing a map of hidden tunnels beneath a temple. Even the paper choice mattered. Thin sheets allowed for layered writing, where one message was brushed over another in different ink types. Reading the top required water to wash it away, exposing the true message beneath. Some spies perfected the art of seasonal coding. They would reference specific plants or weather patterns in their calligraphy that corresponded to military movements. A phrase like "early plum blossoms" in a winter poem signaled an attack before spring thaw, while lingering summer heat warned of delays. The famed ninja Fujibayashi Nagato trained his operatives to alter the radicals within kanji, the building blocks of characters, to convey coordinates. His manual lists how adding an extra dot to the radical for mountain could indicate north, while tilting the water radical marked river crossings. Perhaps the most brilliant ruse involved ink chemistry. Spies sometimes mixed their pigment with alum or saltpeter, creating letters that could only be read when brushed with a specific reagent. There's an account of a merchant spy who delivered a seemingly blank scroll to a daimyo's chef. Only when dipped in broth did the dinner's menu reveal enemy positions. Other agents used fermented soybean paste as invisible ink, harmless until heated, when the characters would darken like searing meat. The ultimate safeguard was deniability. If caught, a spy could claim any irregularities were artistic flair. A 16th-century intelligence report disguised as a love poem survives in the Tokugawa archives. Its first 3 lines flow normally, but the fourth's characters are spaced too far apart. Under interrogation, the scribe insisted it was an aesthetic choice. Only decades later did scholars realize the gaps spelled out a name when read vertically: the traitor who nearly toppled the shogunate. This was the true genius of calligraphic espionage. It turned the samurai's most public art into their most private weapon, where every stroke could be a lie, and every blank space told the truth. The Tokugawa shogunate didn't just rule with swords, they controlled ink. By the early 17th century, certain calligraphy styles became forbidden, not for their artistry, but for what they represented. The most notorious was the Furyu style, characterized by wild, sweeping strokes that seemed to dance off the page. To the shogunate's censors, these untamed lines mirrored the rebellious spirit of the Toyotomi loyalists they'd crushed. A single scroll in this style could land its owner in prison or worse. But in secret tea houses and remote mountain temples, masters kept Furyu alive, teaching it by candlelight to students who risked everything to learn. One such teacher, a former samurai turned monk, disguised forbidden lessons as Buddhist sutra copying. His students would practice Furyu strokes between the columns of sacred texts, their rebellious art hidden beneath devotion. The trick, Furyu's fluid movements resembled the natural wobble of aged hands, so to casual observers, these scrolls just appeared to be the work of elderly scribes. But to the initiated, the deliberate energy in each stroke shouted defiance. The monk's most prized possession was a brush with hollow bristles, designed to conceal a slender blade. If officials raided his temple, he could destroy the evidence with one slash or go down fighting. Other band styles carried even deeper symbolism. The kamio technique, with its sharp, angular characters, had been favored by Christian samurai before the shogunate expelled foreign influences. Practitioners buried their scrolls in sake barrels to protect them from humidity, then smuggled them to Nagasaki's hidden Christian communities. To avoid detection, they developed a coded variant slanting certain radicals to indicate safe houses. A surviving example in a Dutch museum reveals how subtly this worked. The character for light Chinese letter appears normal until you notice its lower left stroke is slightly flattened, pointing toward a church cellar where refugees hid. The shogunate's censors weren't fools. They knew these arts survived, and their countermeasures were ruthless. Officials would demand sudden calligraphy demonstrations from suspected masters, watching for telltale hesitations before forbidden strokes. One account describes a tea master who allegedly burned his own hand on a brazier rather than reveal his distinctive grip. The scar tissue made his writing style unrecognizable. Others took the opposite approach, exaggerating Tokugawa-approved techniques to absurd extremes. A famous letter from a Kyoto silk merchant praises the shogun in painfully rigid characters, each line squared off like prison bars. Between those lines, nearly invisible in diluted ink, a Furyu poem comparing the regime to caged birds singing of freedom. What makes this underground tradition remarkable isn't just its secrecy, it's how the art itself adapted. Forbidden styles developed new hallmarks, lighter ink to fade quickly if soaked, paper woven with extra fibers to resist tearing during hasty destruction. Some masters even encoded messages in the way they stacked finished scrolls. A pile arranged with the third scroll upside down might signal an imminent raid, while alternating horizontal and vertical rolls could indicate safe passage to Edo. The greatest irony, by driving these styles underground, the shogunate unwittingly refined them. Without the constraints of public performance, banned calligraphy became more expressive, more daring. A Furyu master in exile might spend years perfecting a single character, knowing it could be his last. When the Meiji Restoration finally toppled the Tokugawa in 1868, these hidden arts erupted into the open like ink bursting from a broken well. Today, what was once forbidden is celebrated in museums, but if you look closely at those rediscovered scrolls, you'll still find traces of their rebellious past. The faintest tremor in a downward stroke, a barely visible pinprick in the paper where a secret compartment once held a knife. These weren't just artworks. They were battle scars. A samurai's signature was never just a name, it was a battle cry in ink. Unlike the simple scrawls we use today, these warriors crafted elaborate personal seals so distinctive they functioned like visual DNA. Pressed onto documents with vermilion ink, each swirl and slash revealed more than identity, it whispered secrets of lineage, rank, and even the signer's state of mind. Imagine receiving a treaty bearing a daimyo's seal. The thickness of its lines hinted at his confidence, the spacing between strokes betrayed his urgency, and the slightest asymmetry could signal hidden disdain. This wasn't autographing, it was psychological warfare with a brush. The artistry behind Kao was staggering. Masters spent years refining their designs, often incorporating clan symbols, zodiac signs, or even fragments of their sword guards' patterns. The legendary Take to Shingen's seal resembled a whirlwind, a nod to his battlefield tactics, while Oda Nobunaga's intertwined flames and lotus petals reflected his brutal ambition tempered by Buddhist faith. But the real genius lay in their adaptability. A samurai might simplify his cow for routine orders, then unleash its full complexity for solemn vows, the elaborate flourishes serving as a silent oath. One surviving peace treaty from the Sengoku period shows two rival lords' seals pressed so tightly together the ink bleeds crimson where they touch, a visceral metaphor for their fragile alliance. Kao also served as covert diagnostics. When the Tokugawa shogunate required vassals to submit sealed loyalty oaths, officials studied the pressure of each imprint. A faint impression suggested hesitation, an overly bold one, arrogance. There's a chilling account of a daimyo whose seal suddenly grew shaky on documents preceding his rebellion, the tremor in his hand mirrored in the uneven lines. His overlord noticed too late. Forgery was near impossible. Like a swordsmith's temper lines, each cow contained subtle imperfections, a deliberately crooked stroke, an ink trap invisible until pressed, that authenticated it. Ninja spies reportedly trained for years to replicate specific seals, with mixed success. One botched attempt in 1612 led to the collapse of a plot against the shogun when an agent's counterfeit lacked the original's hidden knot, a tiny loop within a character that only appeared under magnification. Perhaps most fascinating were the mood-sensitive variations. Before committing seppuku, the disgraced 47 Ronin each altered their cow, some adding a downward slash like a falling sword, others reducing their designs to stark minimalism as if already fading from the world. Their final seals weren't signatures, they were self-portraits in ink, pressed onto death poems like spiritual fingerprints. Today, these seals still speak. Museums display centuries-old cow whose vermilion remains startlingly vivid, each one a frozen moment when a warrior's soul met paper. Look closely, and you'll see more than art. You'll see the shadow of the hand that held the brush, the breath that steadied it, and the unspoken words trapped in the curves like blood in the grooves of a sword. Picture this: two armored warriors kneel in a silent courtyard, but instead of drawing swords, they reach for their brushes. Ink stones are placed with ceremonial precision, papers unfurled like battle standards. This is a calligraphy duel, where the stroke of a character could decide lands, reputations, even lives. In feudal Japan, these contests were as tense as any sword fight, with judges scrutinizing not just the beauty of the writing, but the intention behind every line. A trembling hand meant cowardice, an overbold stroke signaled recklessness. The brush didn't lie. One famous duel from the Edo period pitted a young upstart against a seasoned general over a disputed border. The challenge: each would write the same kanji justice in a single breath. The general's strokes were impeccable, each angle exact, but the younger man's version had something else. The final downward slash bled ink slightly, as if the brush had paused. To most observers, this was a flaw, but the head judge, a Zen master, saw the truth. That hesitation wasn't uncertainty, it was restraint. The younger samurai had chosen to soften his stroke, showing he valued resolution over vengeance. The disputed land was granted to him on the spot. The judging criteria were as nuanced as swordplay techniques. Judges, often retired daimyo or monks, looked for ikki, a kind of effortless elegance. A masterful piece might mimic the balance of a well-thrown spear, bold yet controlled. Another critical measure was yujin, the depth hinted at beyond the visible strokes. A surviving score sheet from 1653 describes a losing entry as technically flawless but spiritually empty, like a sword polished bright yet never drawn. The winner's work: one feels the weight of the unsaid, like moonlight on a sheathed blade. Some duels turned lethal without a single drop of blood. When a retainer accused his lord of dishonor, their calligraphy duel became a public spectacle. The lord wrote "loyalty" with such force the paper tore, a clear sign of unchecked rage. The retainer responded with the same character, but his strokes were measured, the ink pooling slightly at each turn like a coiled spring. The judges declared him victorious, and the humiliated lord was forced to abdicate. Within weeks, he took his own life. Here, the brush had cut deeper than any sword. Preparation for these duels was as rigorous as combat training. Warriors practiced writing on swaying boats to simulate battlefield instability. Others submerged their hands in ice water before picking up the brush, learning to steady their strokes through numbness, just as they might need to fight wounded. The legendary duelist Sasaki Kajiro reportedly trained by painting characters on vertical cliffs, his body harnessed to rocks. His most famous work, Swallow's Flight, survives today, its strokes arching like blades mid-parry. The most explosive duels blended art and subterfuge. In one notorious match, a samurai secretly loaded his brush with iron filings. When he wrote "mountain," the heavier ink sank deeper into the paper, making the character appear unnaturally bold, a visual metaphor for his unshakable resolve. His opponent, suspecting trickery, responded by writing "wind" with hollow bristles, leaving ghostly impressions that shimmered like a mirage. The judges, torn between raw power and ethereal cunning, declared it the only draw in recorded history. What made these contests so compelling wasn't just the stakes, it was the revelation of character. In sword duels, death came quickly, but calligraphy laid bare a warrior's soul stroke by stroke, the paper holding every hesitation, every burst of pride, like a mirror reflecting not the face, but the mind behind it. To watch a master's brush glide across the page was to witness violence refined into something far more dangerous: truth. History remembers the masterpieces that survived, but some of the most breathtaking samurai calligraphy was lost to fire, war, or deliberate erasure. Imagine entire libraries of scrolls reduced to ashes during castle sieges, their secrets curling into smoke along with the wooden beams that once protected them. Among the greatest casualties was the Hasakawa collection, a trove of calligraphy by warrior poets that burned when Osaka Castle fell in 1615. Survivors described sheets of flaming parchment drifting over the battlefield like dying cranes, the ink boiling off before the paper itself vanished. Based on diaries from the time, scholars believe these scrolls included a legendary work by Take Shinjin, a single massive character for storm, painted with such force that the brush hairs had splintered mid-stroke. Even more tragic were the works intentionally destroyed. After the Shimabara Rebellion, the shogunate ordered every piece of calligraphy by Christian samurai to be burned. Among them was a fabled lamentation scroll by the convert Amakusa Shiro, said to blend Latin script with kanji in a mesmerizing fusion of East and West. Only a single charred fragment survives, showing the corner of what might be a crucifix morphing into the character for sacrifice. Some historians argue the deliberate destruction wasn't just about suppressing faith, it was fear. These hybrid works proved that samurai artistry could adapt to foreign ideas without losing its essence, a dangerous lesson for an isolationist regime. Then there are the scrolls that didn't burn, they disappeared. The most tantalizing case is the Moonlit Strategy Manual, a 14th century text rumored to teach military tactics through calligraphy exercises. Accounts describe characters that changed meaning when viewed by moonlight, and paper that revealed hidden diagrams when folded a certain way. After the Tokugawa seized power, every known copy vanished. But in 2008, a Kyoto antiques dealer discovered a sleeve of papers sewn into the lining of an old armor chest. Among them was a partial page from the manual, just 17 characters instructing how to write, advance in 8 layers of ink, each drying at different intervals to create a timed reveal message. Fragments sometimes tell more than whole scrolls ever could. In a Nagasaki temple, researchers found a scrap of paper used to wrap a sutra book later, identified as part of a death poem by the doomed General Seigo Takamori. The paper's creases suggest it was hastily folded into a tiny square, perhaps slipped to a confidant moments before his final charge. The visible portion reads simply, "Frost on the blade," but infrared scans revealed older writing beneath, a child's practiced strokes of the same phrase, shaky and earnest. Had Seigo kept this scrap from his early training as a reminder? Did he rewrite those words as his world collapsed? The paper won't say. Some losses feel personal. The warlord Date Masamune famously commissioned a set of love poems to his wife, painted on gold leaf paper so thin it was nearly translucent. Chroniclers called them whisper scrolls, meant to be read with the page held against candlelight, where the gold would glow like dawn through silk. Not a single one survives, but in Masamune's hometown, a folk tradition persists. Elderly women teach young girls to write while holding paper up to lanterns, a quiet homage to letters they'll never see. Perhaps the most haunting absence is the Black Silk Letters, a series of military dispatches written during Toyotomi Hideyoshi's Korean campaigns. Woven into fabric to survive battlefield conditions, their contents were so sensitive that surviving records mention messengers swallowing the strips when captured. A single strip exists today, recovered from a shipwreck. Its once vibrant ink now leached blue by seawater, the characters blurred like faces seen through rain. What did these lost works contain? Tactical genius, philosophical revelations, or simply the unguarded humanity of warriors we've only ever known through steel? The frustrating beauty of fragments is that they offer just enough to make the loss tangible, like finding a single polished link from a shattered chainmail shirt. Its purpose clear, its context forever gone. Some calligraphy scrolls were whispered about not for their beauty, but for the horrors they unleashed. Among the darkest legends is the tale of the Hyakumonogatari Kaidankai, the 100 Ghost Stories challenge, where samurai would gather in candlelit rooms, sharing terrifying tales while inscribing each one in blood-tinged ink. As the night deepened and candles flickered out one by one, the final story was always written as a single character on parchment so cursed. The brush would sometimes move on its own. Surviving accounts describe scrolls where the ink pulsed like a living thing, where characters were written by morning revealed names of the soon-to-die. One infamous example resides in a Kyoto temple's locked archive, the Onibai scroll, painted by a 17th-century monk turned vengeful spirit. According to temple records, the monk inscribed Buddhist sutras using ink mixed with his own cremation ashes after being wrongfully executed. Those who later unrolled the scroll reported seeing the characters shift from golden to crimson under candlelight, accompanied by the scent of burning flesh. More chilling still were the accounts of 11 witnesses who copied its text, each died within the year. Their own calligraphy found smeared as if wet with tears despite being decades old. The scroll now remains sealed in a lacquered box wrapped with sacred rope, its surface strangely warm to the touch. Death-predicting calligraphy took subtler forms too. The daimyo Matsudaira Nobitsuna kept a diary where his handwriting grew progressively more distorted, not from madness, but from an unseen force pressing against his brush. On the day of his assassination, his final entry showed the character for Shadow, a Chinese letter written 3 times, each iteration darker than the last, the ink having soaked completely through 5 layers of paper beneath. Forensic calligraphers examining it centuries later discovered something impossible. The third character's strokes contained microscopic traces of the very poison that killed him, though he'd written it hours before the murder. Some curses were invitations. The Wisteria Maiden Letter, a seemingly elegant love poem discovered in an Edo-era samurai's armor chest, bore faint fingerprints not of ink but of powdered bone in its floral motifs. When examined under ultraviolet light, the wisteria blossoms resolved into faces each matching women who'd vanished near the samurai's estates. Most disturbing was the poem's final line, which under magnification revealed itself as not brushstrokes but strands of human hair layered into the paper. Historians now believe this wasn't correspondence at all, but a spiritual snare, a way to bind souls to the parchment through their names written in corpse pigment. Even masterpieces could be lethal. The legendary calligrapher Hanami Kotsu created a celebrated scroll of the Heart Sutra that was later blamed for the extinction of an entire sword-polishing dynasty. After the family acquired it in 1723, their eldest sons began dying at age 36, the same age Kotsu was when he painted it. The deaths stopped only when a Zen priest recognized the characters for life, and death formed a hidden palindrome, a spiritual Ouroboros trapping the family's lineage. Separating the scroll into 3 parts broke the curse, but the sections now kept in separate shrines are said to emit a faint humming when brought within 100 paces of each other. Perhaps the most tragic were the orphan scrolls works whose creators died before completing them. These half-finished characters were believed to house restless spirits, their energy trapped like a sword frozen mid-strike. A famous unfinished dragon character by the swordsman Yaju Mananori still exists, its final stroke tapering into nothingness. Caretakers report the ink never fully dries, beating like sweat on summer nights when the wind blows from the direction of Mananori's grave. Modern spectrographic analysis shows the pigment contains trace elements of mercury, commonly used in Edo period immortality elixirs. Did Mananori, in his final illness, mix his medicine with ink hoping to etch his soul onto the paper? These stories blur the line between superstition and something far older, the primal belief that marks made with intention carry power beyond their form. Whether psychological projection or something supernatural, the terror they inspired was very real. A Tokugawa-era manual for exorcists dedicates 6 chapters to haunted writing, advising priests to burn afflicted scrolls while reciting inverted sutras. Yet some curses refuse to die. As late as 1923, a Tokyo museum curator cataloging war-era calligraphy reported seeing a 14th-century death poem rewrite itself overnight, the new characters spelling a warning about fire. 3 days later, the Great Kanto earthquake ignited the museum's archives, leaving only that single scroll untouched amid the ashes. A samurai's armor wasn't just metal and silk, it was a walking prayer. Before battle, artisans painted kanji onto helmets and chest plates with the same precision as brushstrokes on paper, turning each character into a shield against misfortune. The helmet crest of Date Masamune, the infamous one-eyed dragon, bore the character for 10,000 Chinese letter repeated in gold lacquer, not just a display of wealth, but a silent incantation for boundless divine protection. These weren't decorations, they were talismans in ink, where every stroke carried the weight of a warrior's fate. The most common kanji etched onto armor revealed the soul of Bushido. Courage Chinese letter often appeared on shoulder plates, its bold strokes mirroring the unyielding stance of a fighter. But look closer, and you'd notice subtle variations. Some versions had the central stroke slightly curved, a visual metaphor for flexibility in the face of danger. Loyalty Chinese letter frequently adorned back plates, reminding allies that the wearer would never retreat. One surviving 16th century helmet shows this character written upside down, a deliberate choice by its owner to signify his allegiance would hold even if the world turned upside down. Some designs blurred the line between writing and art. The warlord Takeda's Shinjin's armor featured a stylized, wind Chinese letter character that doubled as swirling storm clouds, its curves echoing the motion of his cavalry's famous maneuvers. Other samurai embedded hidden meanings. A helmet in the Tokyo National Museum displays the kanji for mountain Chinese letter, but the negative space between strokes forms the silhouette of Mount Fuji, symbolizing unshakable resolve. The process was as sacred as the result. Armorers mixed ink with crushed gemstones or powdered temple bells for spiritual potency. Brushes made from the tail hairs of white stallions, animals considered sacred in Shinto, transferred prayers onto lacquer. There are accounts of daimyo pricking their fingers to add blood to the pigment, binding their essence to the armor. One chilling example is the Crimson Oath cuirass, its breastplate inscribed with a vow of vengeance in vermilion that darkened to brown when its wearer died before fulfilling it. Certain motifs defied straightforward translation. The character for life Chinese letter sometimes appeared cracked or incomplete, not from damage, but as a Buddhist reminder of impermanence. A famous mask worn by the warrior Kusunoki Masashige bears the kanji for dream Chinese letter with its final stroke fading, a poetic acknowledgement that his cause might outlive him. Even the placement of characters followed esoteric rules. Sun Chinese letter on the right shoulder and moon Chinese letter on the left invoked celestial balance, while dragon Chinese letter painted along the spine channeled mythical strength through the wearer's backbone. The spiritual stakes were tangible. Warriors believed poorly executed armor calligraphy could invite disaster. After the Battle of Sekigahara, a defeated general's helmet was found with the character for protection, Chinese letter smudged later, attributed to the artisan's shaking hands after learning his son had joined the enemy. Superstitious commanders would reject armor if the ink pooled unevenly, interpreting it as an omen of bleeding wounds. Perhaps most striking were the living characters, kanji, that changed appearance under different conditions. Some used thermochromic lacquers that darkened in cold weather, revealing hidden characters like perseverance Chinese letter when temperatures dropped. Others, like a helmet owned by the Date clan, bore ink mixed with crushed firefly shells, making the motto, "Burn bright, Chinese letter, Japanese letter, Chinese letter, Japanese letter, Japanese letter," glow faintly at night. These weren't mere embellishments, they were visual echoes of a warrior's soul, armor that didn't just protect the body, but proclaimed its wearer's unspoken creed to the world, and perhaps to the gods themselves. Hidden beneath the flowing ink of samurai calligraphy manuals lay secrets far deadlier than beautiful characters. These weren't just instruction books, they were combat ciphers, where every stroke diagram doubled as a swordplay sequence, and every poetry exercise concealed battlefield tactics. Take the Rugetsu Ryu School's manual, its pages filled with what appear to be simple character drills. To the uninitiated, it's just repetitive practice. But tilt the book 45 degrees, and the negative space between strokes reveals the precise footwork for disarming an opponent. The kanji for water Chinese letter wasn't just a vocabulary lesson, its 3 descending strokes mapped the angles for deflecting a downward sword cut, each branching line indicating where to redirect the blade. Some schools took this further embedding entire martial philosophies into seemingly innocent exercises. The Shinkage Ryu scrolls instructed students to write the character for shadow Chinese letter with exaggerated spacing between radicals. Later, they'd learn this mirrored the school's core principle, manipulating an enemy's perception by leaving strategic gaps in defense. One advanced manual from the Edo period contains a deceptively simple assignment copying a poem about autumn leaves. Only after years of training would students realize the poem's 7 stanzas corresponded to 7 pressure points on the human body, each leaf's placement marking where to strike with a fingertip or blunt weapon. The most ingenious manuals functioned as layered puzzles. A Yaju Ryu text begins with basic brush techniques, then gradually introduces flaws, a character suddenly missing its final dot, or strokes crossing at unnatural angles. These weren't mistakes, they were tactical riddles. The missing dots signaled when to feign vulnerability in combat, while the crossed strokes taught intercepting an attack mid-motion. Even the paper itself held secrets. One manual's pages were deliberately uneven, thicker along the edges when rolled into a tube and held to light. The varying opacity projected shadows that demonstrated spear grip adjustments. Philosophical teachings hid in plain sight too. The Edo Ryu School's calligraphy curriculum included meditative writing of the character, empty, Chinese letter. Beginners saw it as Zen contemplation, but advanced students learned its true lesson. The spaces between the strokes represented openings in an opponent's guard. The manual's margin notes, seemingly about ink consistency, actually described how to vary sword strikes, thick strokes for crushing blows, thinning lines for precise cuts. There's a chilling account of a 19th century scholar who accidentally deciphered one such manual while studying antique scripts. He transcribed what he thought were poetic phrases, only to have a visiting swordsman immediately recognize them as assassination techniques. Decoding these manuals required initiation rites. In the Gaijin Ryu school, students received their first scroll only after mastering basic swordsmanship. The catch, the scroll was written in Tensho seal script, its archaic characters unreadable without oral teachings. This forced disciples to rely on their teachers' verbal explanations, ensuring secrets couldn't be stolen. Other schools used visual mnemonics. A Hazoin Ryu spear manual depicted the character for willow Chinese letter with drooping strokes that mirrored the whipping motion of their signature technique. To outsiders, it was artistry. To initiates, it was muscle memory training. Perhaps the most brilliant deception lay in the Nen Ryu school's mirror writing manuals. Students practiced copying reversed characters, ostensibly to improve dexterity. In truth, they were learning to mentally flip combat scenarios. If an enemy attacked right, the mirrored script trained them to instinctively counter left. The school's founder left a cryptic note in his diary. The brush teaches what the sword cannot say. These manuscripts weren't just training tools, they were survival insurance. During the Tokugawa persecutions, several schools smuggled forbidden techniques past censors by disguising them as calligraphy lessons. A Hokushin Edo Ryu scroll confiscated in 1832 appeared to be a children's writing primer. Years later, a sharp-eyed archivist noticed the stroke order diagrams matched the school's secret dagger drawing techniques, each numbered brush movement corresponding to a lethal wrist rotation. Today, surviving manuals still guard their secrets. Infrared scans of a Tatsumi Ryu text revealed faded undertext, a combat manual written in vinegar ink beneath calligraphy exercises. The overwritten characters weren't random. They marked where to strike on the hidden diagrams beneath. Even now, historians debate how many innocent practice books in museum collections might contain similar revelations, their true meanings lost because the last teacher who knew the cipher died without an heir. What makes these encoded manuals so extraordinary isn't just their ingenuity, it's what they reveal about the samurai mind. To them, there was no divide between art and war, between philosophy and survival. A brushstroke could be a sword stroke in disguise, and every empty space on the page was a battleground waiting to be filled. History remembers the sword-wielding samurai, but their female counterparts wielded brushes with equal cunning. While women were often barred from open warfare, many mastered calligraphy as a silent weapon, turning societal expectations into strategic advantages. Take Nakano Takiko, the legendary female warrior of the Aizu domain, who penned poetic dispatches between battles. Her flowing characters appeared demure at first glance, but the spacing between lines concealed troop movements. To the untrained eye, it was elegant correspondence. To her allies, each gently curved stroke mapped night raids and supply routes. These women didn't just write, they engineered entire communication networks. In Edo period castles, noble women like Atsuya, wife of the daimyo Date Masamune, hosted poetry circles where ink-stained sleeves disguised political machinations. A seemingly innocent verse about plum blossoms might critique shogunate policies through carefully chosen kanji radicals. One surviving scroll shows a delicate poem about spring rain, but tilted toward light, and the watered silk reveals rebellious names written in nearly invisible starch ink. Some female samurai turned domestic arts into espionage tools. The needlework letters of the Hasakawa clan are legendary, embroidered silk pouches containing hidden compartments for calligraphy, brushes with hollow handles. Ladies-in-waiting would gift these to allies, the decorative stitching encoding meeting times, chrysanthemum patterns for the 9th hour, pine motifs for the 3rd watch. Even the colors held meaning. A red thread twisted counterclockwise signaled danger, while indigo knots marked safe houses. The most brilliant operators worked in plain sight. Teru, daughter of the Tokugawa-era strategist Takeda Shinjin, served as governess to rival clan heirs. Her beautifully illustrated children's books featured animals forming kanji with their bodies, a crouching rabbit creating the character for listen, a coiled foxtail sketching deceive. Years later, her pupils would recognize these shapes in battlefield signals. But perhaps no story compares to the butterfly scroll incident of 1864. A Kyoto tea mistress named Ohisa, trained in the elegant Sosho calligraphy style, began selling ornate fans to visiting dignitaries. Only after war broke out did authorities discover the fans' bamboo ribs were carved with microscopic battle plans, readable when cast as shadows by lantern light. By then, Ohisa had vanished, leaving behind just one clue: a final character painted in lacquer that changed from loyalty to vengeance when heated. These women didn't just adapt to restrictions, they weaponized them. Where men saw decorative hobbies, they built clandestine languages. Their greatest triumph wasn't in defying the system, but in making the system work for them, one deliberate stroke at a time. When the Meiji Restoration swept through Japan in 1868, it didn't just topple the shogunate, it threatened to erase centuries of samurai calligraphy overnight. Overnight, new laws banned the carrying of swords and dismantled the feudal class system, leaving many warriors scrambling to adapt or vanish. Traditional ink brushes were shoved into drawers as Western-style pens flooded the markets, and the elegant, disciplined strokes of shodo suddenly seemed as outdated as armor in an age of railroads. But here's the twist: samurai calligraphy didn't disappear. It went underground, mutated, and in some cases, escaped across oceans. Some disillusioned warriors turned their brushes into acts of quiet rebellion. The infamous Shajitai, a band of Tokugawa loyalists, smuggled calligraphy scrolls out of burning Edo castles not just to preserve art, but to embed hidden messages in the stroke order. One surviving example, now in a private collection in Kyoto, appears to be a simple copy of Confucian texts, but when viewed under ultraviolet light, the margins reveal feverish accounts of lost battles, written in ink mixed with soot from the very fires that destroyed their world. These weren't just historical records, they were last stands in pigment. Meanwhile, the Meiji government actively rewrote calligraphy's role. Schools once reserved for samurai sons now taught Western penmanship, and official documents demanded crisp, uniform characters suitable for printing presses. Yet in remote temple schools, aging sensei continue to teach the old ways. A fascinating diary from an Iwate prefecture instructor describes how he disguised classical brush techniques as folk art lessons, using harmless-looking practice sheets that secretly drilled students in the swift, angular strokes once used for battlefield dispatches. To inspectors, it was nostalgia. To his pupils, it was cultural guerrilla warfare. Ironically, some of the finest samurai calligraphy survived because it was stolen. European collectors, obsessed with Japan's exotic image, paid fortunes for authentic relics of the vanishing warrior class. Dealers in Yokohama and Kobe catered to this demand, often selling fakes, but occasionally, genuine masterpieces slipped through. The British Museum's famed Red Seal Scroll, for instance, was purchased in 1873 as a curiosity. Only decades later did scholars realize its bold characters were penned by none other than Seigo Takamori, the last samurai himself, its ink infused with gunpowder residue from his final rebellion. But the most unexpected survival happened in America. Japanese immigrants, many former samurai stripped of status, brought calligraphy to California plantations and railroad camps. Displaced and desperate, they taught the art as a way to earn meals and, in doing so, preserved techniques that were dying out back home. A collection of letters discovered in a Sacramento attic in the 1990s shows stunning examples of Edo period styles adapted to English phrases. One laborer's heartbreaking note to his family, written on the back of a railroad paycheck, blends the kanji for endurance with the English word hope, its hybrid strokes a testament to resilience. Today, echoes of samurai calligraphy linger in surprising places. Modern martial arts dojos still begin classes with ceremonial writing, the brush's motion limbering the wrist for swordplay. Corporate executives in Tokyo pay fortunes for Bushido coaching that turns boardroom strategies into ink-on-paper meditations. And in a dusty corner of the Parisian Musée Guimet, a single scroll survives, smuggled out by a French diplomat's maid in 1871. Its contents, a love poem allegedly composed by a shogun's daughter, its final character unfinished. Conservationists recently discovered something astonishing. The paper bears faint fingerprints pressed into the fibers, as if someone had gripped it tightly while the ink was still wet. A scholar's theory, the princess herself clutched it as her world collapsed around her, leaving behind not just words, but the ghost of her hand. The brush hasn't stopped moving. In quiet dojos and neon-lit Tokyo galleries, a new generation of masters keeps samurai calligraphy alive, not as a relic, but as a living conversation between past and present. Take contemporary artist Koji Kakenuma, whose performances electrify audiences worldwide. Dressed in traditional hakama, he wields a brush the size of a spear, dancing across paper stretched like a battlefield. His explosive renditions of ancient kanji don't just honor the old ways, they reinvent them, using UV-reactive inks that pulse under blacklight, revealing hidden layers of meaning. When asked about his fusion of tradition and innovation, Kakenuma quotes the legendary Miyamoto Musashi: "Adapt like water, but remember the source." Meanwhile, in Kyoto's Butokuden martial arts halls, calligraphy has returned to its warrior roots. Head instructor Yuko Orikasa teaches swordsmanship through brushwork, her students practicing iaido draws and character strokes in the same fluid motion. The kami stance for cutting downward mirrors the pressure needed for a perfect toe blade character. She explains, demonstrating how the brush's spine must align with the forearm like a sword's kisaki tip. Her dojo's walls display hybrid works sword cuts on paper treated with iron-rich sumi ink that rusts over time, visually echoing Musashi's concept of decaying strategy. The avant-garde scene pushes boundaries further. Osaka-based collective Ainke Edge stages calligraphy, duels using motion capture technology, where brushstrokes materialize as 3D sculptures midair. One performance reimagined the infamous black silk letters of feudal spies, projecting hidden messages from a dancer's inked sleeves onto surrounding walls. Founder Ren Shioda remarks, "Today's secrets aren't in layered paper, they are in data layers and augmented reality. Yet even their wildest experiments adhere to one sacred rule. Every digital stroke begins with grinding real ink, linking pixels to pigment in an unbroken chain." Some revivals are intensely personal. Hawaiian-Japanese artist Kani Hasegawa traces her lineage to a samurai scribe who fled to pineapple plantations after the Meiji Restoration. Her plantation scrolls weave sugarcane fibers into washi paper, blending kanji with plantation work songs written in faded pencil, a testament to how displaced warriors preserved culture through everyday acts. "My ancestors couldn't carry swords," she says, "so they fought with brushstrokes that remembered home. Perhaps the most unexpected evolution is in therapy." Tokyo psychiatrist Dr. Haruto Kobayashi uses calligraphy as trauma treatment for veterans and first responders. His clinic's walls display works by patients, some shaky, some fierce, all exploring characters like resilience or calm through repetitive strokes. The rhythm of grinding ink activates the parasympathetic nervous system, he explains, just as it once steadied samurai before battle. One police officer's series shows the kanji for protect evolving from fractured to unbroken over 6 months of sessions, each stroke a silent witness to healing. These modern practitioners share one conviction: samurai calligraphy was never just about perfect characters, it was about presence, whether through VR headsets or centuries-old brushes, that essence remains. As Kakinuma puts it while preparing for a Lunar New Year performance, "When my ink hits the paper, I'm not a 21st century artist. I'm part of a line that stretches back to warriors who understood some battles are fought in silence, one breath, one stroke at a time." Let's unravel the secrets of an actual 17th century scroll attributed to the infamous Ronin Miyamoto Iwao. At first glance, it's a tranquil poem about moonlight on water, but the brushstrokes tell a darker story. Start with the opening character, Moon Chinese letter. Notice how the first downward stroke trembles slightly, as if the brush hesitated. That's no accident. To trained eyes, this subtle waver signals distress. Historical records confirm Iwao composed this days after his lord's forced seppuku, the jagged edge of grief bleeding into his usually flawless technique. Now follow the ink's flow to the second character, Shadow Chinese letter. The right radical drips unnaturally thick, pooling at the base like congealed blood. This wasn't poor craftsmanship, it was a coded lament. During the Edo period, such deliberate ink blots were known as teardrop strokes, mourning marks disguised as artistic flourish, but the real revelation lies in the negative space. Tilt the scroll sideways, and the gap between moon and shadow forms a perfect sword silhouette. Coincidence? Unlikely. Iwao's disciples later confessed this was his silent oath of vengeance. The paper itself whispers clues. Infrared imaging reveals faint indentations beneath the poem, ghostly traces of earlier erased words. By analyzing the pressure patterns, scholars reconstructed part of a discarded draft, the character for betrayal Chinese letter, its angry slashes carving into the fibers. Iwao likely wrote it in white-hot fury before self-censoring into poetic ambiguity. Even the paper's uneven edges speak volumes. Torn rather than cut, this was likely a repurposed battlefield map, its original grid still visible under magnification. A samurai's recycling wasn't frugality. It was defiance using the enemy's own reconnaissance as his mourning parchment. Most telling is the signature. Iwao's usual elegant cow seal is here reduced to a ragged cross, its vermilion pigment mixed with something darker. Spectral analysis matched its chemical signature to iron oxide, likely powdered from a broken sword guard. In his final act of rebellion, the Ronin didn't just sign his name. He sealed it with the corpse of his weapon. Every element conspires to reveal what the words politely avoid: a warrior's rage wrapped in silk-thin propriety. The scroll's recipient, the shogunate official who ordered Iwao's lord's death, would have recognized these cues immediately. That trembling moon wasn't just poetry. It was a blade held steady at his throat. The brush you hold today may look like a humble tool, but in the hands of a calligraphy master, it becomes a bridge across centuries. Modern brushes, with their synthetic bristles and machine-turned handles, seem worlds apart from the hand-carved bamboo and wolf hair tools samurai once prized. Yet when you dip a contemporary brush into sumi ink and touch it to paper, something remarkable happens. The same alchemy of control and fluidity that defined a warrior's discipline centuries ago comes alive. The key lies in the details. Traditional brushes used by samurai had a unique taper, allowing a single stroke to shift from hair thin to bold as a sword slash. Today's high-end reproductions mimic this with blended goat and horsehair, but purists argue the absence of winter-hunted badger bristles, once believed to hold ink with unrivaled precision, subtly alters the rhythm of the work. Ink tells a similar story. Authentic sumi ink sticks still exist, crafted from centuries-old recipes using pine soot and animal glue. Rubbing one against an inkstone releases a scent samurai would recognize, earthy, slightly metallic, like a forge before battle. But modern Chinese letter, saka and boku, quick-drying ink, sacrifices this ritual for convenience. Side-by-side comparisons reveal the trade-off. Vintage ink flows with a depth and variation modern versions struggle to replicate, pooling in ways that create natural gradients, what masters call the voice of the stroke. There's a reason surviving samurai scrolls seem to shimmer. Their ink contains microscopic imperfections from hand grinding, catching light like Damascus steel. Paper is where the difference feels most profound. Samurai wrote on Chinese letter washi, handmade from mulberry fibers so resilient some documents survived fires and floods. Its slightly fibrous surface grips ink differently than today's smooth, mass-produced sheets. When you write the character for wind, Chinese letter on authentic Edo period paper, the kanji's sweeping strokes appear to flutter, the fibers guiding the ink outward like wind through trees. Modern calligraphers seeking this effect often mistamper their paper with diluted sake, attempting to recreate the natural sizing samurai took for granted. Yet for all these contrasts, one truth remains: the hand matters more than the tool. When a contemporary master like Shoko Kanazawa paints the same character with both a $1,000 antique brush and a $20 modern one, the results are nearly indistinguishable to untrained eyes. The lesson: samurai calligraphy wasn't about perfection of materials, but mastery of intention. Their tools amplified skill, they didn't create it. Perhaps the most striking experiment is pressure mapping, where sensors track how modern calligraphers wield brushes versus historical records of samurai technique. The findings reveal warriors applied uneven pressure light at the start of a stroke, crushing down mid-motion, then lifting abruptly. This wasn't carelessness, it mirrored the cadence of a sword draw. Today's artists, trained in peaceful studios, often produce smoother, more even lines beautiful, but missing the heartbeat of brushwork that once doubled as combat training. A few artisans are bridging this gap. In Kyoto, third generation, brushmaker Hideo Yamamoto blends synthetic fibers with strands of silk from dismantled samurai armor linings. His creations carry literal threads of history, yet flex like modern tools. Meanwhile, chemists at Tokyo University have recreated the exact metallic compounds found in blood ink scrolls, offering ethically sourced alternatives for those seeking the visceral impact of the originals. The ultimate test comes when replicating famous works. Attempting to repaint Musashi's dream character with contemporary materials exposes subtle but telling differences. Modern ink spreads marginally faster, requiring quicker hand movements. Current paper absorbs more aggressively, demanding adjusted pressure. These aren't failures, they're conversations. Each deviation reminds us that calligraphy isn't frozen in time. It's a dialogue between artist and tradition, where every tool leaves its own whisper on the page. Holding a samurai's brush today isn't about recreating the past. It's about feeling the same challenges they faced: the drag of bristles, the ink's unpredictable flow, and realizing their mastery wasn't in the tools, but in the discipline to make those tools sing. When your brush hesitates mid-stroke, that's not a limitation. It's the same moment of truth a warrior faced centuries ago. The materials have evolved, but the battle between control and surrender remains unchanged. Grip your brush like you would a sword, not with tension, but with readiness. The samurai's writing posture began with the spine straight as a spear, knees slightly bent in seiza or standing with one foot forward, mirroring a duelist stance. Your non-writing hand anchors the paper like a shield, fingers splayed to steady the battlefield. Breathe in as you lift the brush, exhale as the tip meets paper, letting the stroke flow from your core, not just your wrist. This wasn't artistry, it was kata, a martial form where every line carried intention. Now, let's paint the kanji for courage, Chinese letter. Start with the left radical, a downward slash like a spear thrust quick, decisive, thinning slightly at the base. Hesitation here would have drawn scorn in a samurai's hall. Uneven pressure betrayed fear. Next, the central stroke, a horizontal cut, angled slightly upward like a blade parrying. Common mistake, curving it downward, which old manuals called the posture of retreat. Finish with the right radical's sweeping hook, flicking upward like a wakizashi dagger drawn in close combat. The entire character should balance like a takai sword on a stand, bold but never clumsy. Watch for the pitfalls that would have shamed a daimyo, blots. Unforgivable, they signaled lack of control, like a sword slipping in sweat-slicked hands. Overcorrecting a stroke was worse. Samurai believed ink, like blood, couldn't be taken back. If you falter, embrace the flaw and adapt, just as a warrior would turn a missed strike into a feint, and never let your brush hover mid-stroke. That trembling pause was called the ghost's whisper, the mark of a distracted mind. Now the true test, write it one-handed while gripping a bakken wooden sword in the other. Samurai trainees did this to synchronize hand and spirit. If your kanji wobbles, your grip is too rigid. If the sword dips, your focus wavers, the goal. Characters as steady as a bowstring at full draw. Finally, hold your work to candlelight, as feudal lords did. The ink should glow like lacquered armor, consistent, unbroken, with no trace of uncertainty. Because in the end, this wasn't just handwriting. It was a mirror, and a samurai's reflection could never lie. Beneath the glare of ultraviolet scanners, centuries-old samurai calligraphy surrenders its secrets, one pixel at a time. Conservators in Tokyo's National Archives work with the precision of battlefield surgeons, using hyperspectral imaging to uncover faded characters on scrolls damaged by fire, blood, or time. The technology reveals what human eyes can't: traces of ink where a warrior's hand once hesitated, or hidden layers of text where messages were scraped away and rewritten. One recently scanned letter from the Shimazu clan showed 3 distinct versions of the same document beneath its surface, each revision marked by subtly different pressures, like a palimpsest of political intrigue. Yet preservation goes beyond mere digitization. At Kyoto University, researchers employ AI to reconstruct lost masterpieces from fragments, feed the algorithm enough examples of a samurai's surviving calligraphy, and it can extrapolate how missing sections might have looked, predicting brushstroke angles and ink density with eerie accuracy. The team recently completed a charred 16th century scroll by date Masamune, generating a probable version of its final third based on his verified works. Traditionalists argue the result is flawless and utterly soulless. An algorithm can mimic the curve of a character, says master calligrapher Iritakes, but it cannot replicate the tremor of a hand that knew it might be writing its last words. The debate intensifies with 3D recreations. Some museums now offer tactile displays where visitors can trace raised versions of famous works, feeling the ridges of a daimyo's furious strokes through their fingertips. But a startling discovery at Osaka Castle's archives complicates matters. When comparing a contemporary artist's reproduction of a war-era poem to the original, infrared analysis revealed something unsettling. The modern version's ink pooled uniformly, while the antique scroll showed microscopic variations, tiny gaps where the brush hairs had split mid-stroke, likely as the writer heard distant combat. That's not technique, says historian Kenji Matsuda. That's a human reacting to cannon fire. Perhaps the most controversial project comes from Stanford's Digital Humanities Lab, where physicists are recreating the actual conditions under which samurai wrote. By analyzing the molecular structure of antique paper fibers, they've simulated how humidity would have affected ink absorption on the eve of battles in rainy seasons. Their environmental AI adjusts digital brushstrokes accordingly, making characters bleed as they would have on damp paper during Japan's monsoon months. The result, a hypothetical, sweat and rain version of Miyamoto Musashi's death poem that looks radically different from the clean museum replica. Yet for all this innovation, some secrets stubbornly resist technology. Take the infamous Crimson Vow Scroll, penned by a condemned Ronin using ink mixed with his own blood. Modern spectroscopy confirms the hemoglobin content, but no scanner can detect what scholars swear they've witnessed, that the characters darken annually on the anniversary of his execution, as if breathing. Similarly, when a team at Cambridge attempted to recreate the legendary singing ink of Zen master Takuen Soho, said to hum when exposed to certain Buddhist chants, their chemically identical substitute remained silent. The question lingers like incense smoke in a temple hall. Can data ever capture the ineffable? When a 21st century artist paints Musashi's dream character with perfect historical accuracy, is it the same as when the swordsman himself did it moments before death? Or does meaning reside in the unquantifiable, the weight of the breath before the brush touched paper, the unconscious tightening of an abdomen still sore from yesterday's duel? As we stitch these fragments back together with fiber optics and neural networks, we're forced to confront what we're really preserving, the ink or the intention behind it. One truth emerges from the digitized dust. However advanced our tools become, they remain just that, tools. The scrolls that survive wars and fires do so not because of perfect preservation, but because someone, centuries ago, believed they were worth risking death to protect. That urgency, that visceral connection, might be the one thing no algorithm can simulate. In the end, perhaps the most faithful preservation is still the simplest, sitting cross-legged before an original, grinding fresh ink, and letting the silence of centuries teach your hand what the screens never could. The samurai's brush was never just a tool. It was a mirror of the soul, a weapon, and a whisper across centuries. What began as strokes on paper became a philosophy etched in ink, where every character carried the weight of a life lived with unwavering intention. This wasn't calligraphy as we understand it today. It was shodo, the way of writing, a discipline that blurred the lines between art and survival, between meditation and combat. The true legacy of samurai calligraphy isn't found in museums or antique scrolls. It's in the radical idea that something as simple as writing can be a transformative act, a ritual where focus becomes power, and every mark on the page is a covenant with the present moment. Consider the quiet rebellion in this practice. In an era defined by swords and siege warfare, these warriors carved out sacred spaces where the brush was mightier than the blade. A daimyo could conquer lands with an army, but it was his calligraphy that revealed whether he deserved to rule them. A spy's coded poem could topple regimes without a single life lost. Even the humblest samurai, grinding ink in the pre-dawn stillness, understood this truth. Mastery of the self began with mastery of the stroke. The paper didn't lie. It recorded every hesitation, every burst of emotion, every unspoken thought, holding up a mirror to the writer's mind with terrifying clarity. Today, we've traded that mindfulness for speed, tapping screens where once we pressed brushes. But the samurai's lesson lingers. Writing isn't just communication, it's alchemy. The way you shape your letters, the pressure of your pen, even the spaces between words, they all betray secrets you might not realize you're telling. Imagine your grocery list scrawled in haste, or a hurried note to a loved one. What would a 17th century sensei see in those jagged lines? Impatience, distraction, or perhaps moments of unexpected grace where your hand slowed, your breath deepened, and for just a second, you were as present as a warrior steadying his blade before the strike. This is the provocative paradox of samurai calligraphy. Their most fragile works, ink on paper, outlasted castles and armor because they captured something eternal, the human struggle to marry discipline with creativity, control with surrender. When Musashi painted his final, dream character with dying breaths, or when a condemned Ronin sealed his death poem with a blood-inked thumbprint, they weren't just creating art. They were proving that even in destruction, there's a way to leave beauty behind one deliberate stroke at a time. So the next time you pick up a pen, pause. Feel the weight of it in your hand, the texture of the page beneath your fingers. What unseen messages are you leaving in the curve of your letters, the slant of your signature? Could your writing, like the samurais, become a practice not just of words, but of presence? Centuries from now, if someone unfurled the paper you touched today, what would your ink reveal about the life you lived and the mind you forged